Wszystko zaczęło się od króla Jagiełły. Mała Łodzia stała się miastem, które w XIX wieku rozwijało się najszybciej na świecie. W ciągu zaledwie 60 lat od powstania pierwszej manufaktury powstaje przemysłowa, wielonarodowościowa metropolia. Jednak wiatry historii nie zawsze jej sprzyjały. To, co zniszczył los, odbudowują łodzianie. Nasza Łódź. Miasto wielkich szans. Od 600 lat w sercu Polski i Europy.
Jesteśmy Polakami. Jesteśmy niezwykłym społeczeństwem. Zawsze w obliczu wielkiego wyzwania potrafimy się mobilizować. Potrafimy stawić czoła wielkim wyzwaniom. Bo nie potrafimy stać obojętnie. Bo obchodzi nas bezpieczeństwo i przyszłość naszych dzieci. Bo wierzymy, że nadzieja zwycięża apatię, lęk i strach. Bo mimo wszelkich przeciwności nigdy się nie poddajemy. Potrafimy ciężko pracować, wspierać się i działać razem. Bo zależy nam na naszej ojczyźnie, naszym osiedlu, naszej ulicy. Bo chcemy naszych niezbywalnych praw i wolności. Bo nie oddamy naszych marzeń. Nadchodzi punkt zwrotny.
Dzień dobry Państwu, Magdalena Rigamonti.
Good afternoon, Magdalena Rigamonti. I'm the journalist of Onet, and I would like to welcome you here sitting in the audience, those who watch us online through Freedom Games website, and I would like to welcome Onet audience as our debate is going broadcasted. I've got 45 minutes and 40 seconds. We are right on time. This is another debate during the Freedom Games with females only, and this is something we should appreciate. A round of applause for the organizers for making such decisions that not only males discuss serious matters. We are going to talk about the turning point that has been going on in Poland for 33 years, since 1989. We are going to talk about how to change the most restrictive abortion law in Poland. What will happen in a month's time, on the 15th of October 2023, that will be the turning point, or we won't see the turning point. We could discuss it, analyze it, tell the fortune, but we don't know what's going to happen, assuming that the acts and regulations, as well as decisions of the parliament, won't change the abortion law in Poland. We can discuss how to do it in a different way. The situation is as follows. We in Poland are fully independent when it comes to women's rights and anti-abortion law. Poland decides what women's rights look like. I'm going to introduce my speakers in a moment, but I would like to learn how it can be done in a different way using legal methods. We've got with us Katalin Czech from Hungary, doctor, gynecologist, activist and politician. A round of applause. Opponent of Viktor Orban, that's important.
That's a very important clarification indeed.
Alva,
European Liberal Forum, for many years dealing with women's rights, children's rights, human rights, and many other aspects. I would like to tell you that owing to her, there was the abortion referendum in Ireland, and we know what its result in 2018 was. And Sylwia Gregorczyk-Abram, the well-known ambitious lawyer, free courts activist fighting for free courts since 2015. The first question goes to Katalin, Czech. Could you tell us what legal political methods from the perspective of the European Parliament we can use to try to change the most restrictive anti-abortion act in Poland, and this is what we have in Poland?
First of all, I would like to thank the organizers very warmly for having me here again. It's lovely to be back in Łódź and also to discuss this very important matter in such a crucial moment, because I really feel that Poland is indeed at a turning point. We in Hungary, in the Hungarian opposition, we know how it looks like. With every election that is lost, things are getting more and more difficult to reverse. So it is a fundamentally important moment, and I am really following the news with great hopes. Because there is a global attack on women's rights. There is a general backsliding that we witness not only in many European countries, but also globally. And it's really sending me shivers down my spine to see how many of those rights we took for granted are getting reversed. And of course, the question is obvious: what can Europe do? And here I have to say that currently, every member state has the right to decide over abortion and women's rights. And I feel, not that I feel, but I'm convinced that this is terribly wrong. Because women's rights, the right to access free and safe abortions, are basic, fundamental human rights.
Katalin, ty jesteś...
Katalin, you are a member. Katalin, you are a member of the Human Rights Commission. That's why I decided to start from this conversation from you, and that's why I asked this question to you.
Yes, and here I feel, just adding to that, that we need to change the treaties. We need to change the treaties, and we need to amend the Charter of Fundamental Rights to include the right to free and safe abortions. And this is what my group Renew Europe has been fighting for. And of course, changing the treaties are difficult, but it's necessary. Because women's rights are not just like a fact that states can decide over their tax laws. Women are not numbers. Women are European citizens, and they need to have equal rights to access this fundamental healthcare all across Europe. So the most important thing would be to indeed include this provision in the treaties and guarantee these rights globally. But until we get to this point, I think it's very important to raise awareness to the direness of the situation and to fight for the possibility of having more European funding to those organizations that help women in this situation, to have partners all across Europe, which is already happening, in my opinion, where Polish women can access this very necessary health care. We need to mobilize people, and we need to get the word out about how necessary change is and how urgent and fundamental the situation is where Polish women are, but also we have to help and commend the bravery of those who are helping women even in this situation when they are very often facing legal repercussions and being chastised by the government. So we in Parliament have been putting the call for universal access for abortion in many of the resolutions. We are calling for it in a number of legal texts. Also, we fought for the EU-wide ratification of the Istanbul Convention, which we hope will take place. But the bottom line is we need to create a Europe where it is in the treaties that human rights have to be universal. No matter where you live, no matter where you're from, if you're a European citizen, you have to have the right to free and safe abortions. So this is what we've been fighting for.
Alva, pytanie do
Alva, question to you. You were nodding when Katalin was speaking, but the very fact that we need that Europe should be driven by the right for abortion can be discussed over and over again, and we can highlight we should. What can we do in reality? What do you do to make the change in the law?
I think the situation in Ireland was quite different to the situation in Poland. We had a referendum on the basis that we already had enshrined in our constitution that the right of the unborn was equal to the right of the woman. So we had to repeal that law in order to bring in abortion. So we had no choice. But there is a choice here. So I think it's very important to look at what the political dynamic is now, what the debate is, what public support there is, because in order to repeal the referendum and to bring in abortion in Ireland, that took over 20 years. We had other referendums in the lead up, for example, that allowed women to travel to England predominantly to get abortions. So it was a journey. And along the way, many organizations, civil society, and then in the end, almost cross-party support for the referendum took place. We had a lot of enemies. We had a lot of very conservative US interference in our election, actually. So you have to really look very carefully at the different scenarios. And here, I think the only solution realistically can be from within Poland. It has to come from within the citizenry, that they realize that women need access to abortion. And the way that we did that was through we took it to the UN, we took it to the European Court of Human Rights. We had many court cases within Ireland, so there was a legal framework, but changing the minds, that was the thing that made the referendum a success. And in the end, it was over 66%. No one thought that we would achieve that. And I have to say that our democratic process is different to what you have in Poland. We had what is called a citizens' assembly beforehand, where we had representatives from different demographics within Ireland, and they all discussed it in a very rational, citizens' participation led process, which then came to the conclusion that we should have a referendum. Is that possible in the Poland of today? I'm not sure. So I do want to say that there is hope. There's hope if you bring together enough civil society, enough politicians, if you have human rights lawyers, if you have healthcare professionals working together to change people's minds. And that's how we achieve change in Ireland.
Proszę Państwa,
I would like to remind you of the interview with Kaczyński for Pismo a year ago. Every woman who wants to have the abortion can go to another country, just like the Irish could go to England, to the UK, and do it there. The cynical approach of the ruling party led to what happened in autumn 2020, when the Constitutional Tribunal passed the nearly complete abortion ban. And then Polish women went on strike. They were shouting in the streets that they did not accept such a situation. Women's strike or strikes took many months, and there were many difficult situations in relation to that. But before we talk about the referendum mentioned by Alva in the context of Ireland, I would like to ask Sylwia Gregorczyk-Abram about the legal situation in Poland, because our anti-abortion law in Poland is restrictive. What do you, as a lawyer and representative of free courts and women fighting for human rights, for the rule of law for many years, fighting for the same rights for Poles as for other Europeans, what can you do? No, not in private, but I mean, what can we do in general to use some European law elements to change the restrictive anti-abortion law? And can you do that? Thank you very much for inviting me. Before I answer this question, I would like to refer to what the previous speakers mentioned, that the European Union does not impose our abortion law in Poland. should be granted to women. But first of all, we should talk about abortion in a broader sense, not about right for abortion full stop, but the right for humane treatment, right for healthcare, right for privacy, and not for discrimination. Nobody imposes it, but we, as the member state, are bound by international resolutions which ban non-humane treatment or torturing, and which protect our privacy. We've got myriads of cases, including in the European Tribunal. There are still 2 sentences that have not been implemented. Alicja 1000 versus Poland is one of them, and the Committee for Human Rights at the UN. This is all that Poland should fulfill. This is the obligation we undertook, and we do not fulfill it, depriving women of the right to decide in the case of irreversible health injury of their unborn baby, fetus, is non-humane treating. So what can we do? There are 2 stages we can identify for now, and okay, I'm talking about a situation of change that we do hope for in October. I thought you would say you are talking about the situation when the change won't happen. 37% for the law and justice, according to current surveys. And if Confederation is with them, we won't have the change. What if there is no change? Right, we can see what the situation is like, and in the case of abortion, it perhaps won't change. Either say it would exacerbate or aggravate. We hear some radical movement saying you should punish women for abortion, they should go to prison, and it could come true. We, as human rights defenders, can then do what Federa or we, as Wolne Sądy, have been doing. There are 2 paths of proceedings in the European Tribunal and UNs, which promote certain standards. But we have the standard which is not executed, just like the previous cases I mentioned. We've got the tool, but it is not efficient. This is the great tool for the future, for looking for the support in the European institutions and the Committee of the Council of Ministers when it comes to the European Court of Human Rights.
If I may, I would like to tell you about the situation, how to reverse it. People often ask me whether it means the so-called the ruling on abortion by the High Court, does it cement the situation forever? This is what citizens ask. So in the healthy world, if there is the ruling by judges, it should be binding, and then it wouldn't be able to have the second hearing, because we're talking about the constitutional court. This ruling was passed by the fake judges. We've got rulings of the Human Rights Court that states that this was not the court that has the power to issue such rulings. Mrs. Pawłowicz should not be the judge in these cases, so it will be much easier to overrule this judging. The project of the Battery Foundation states that these signatures are invalid, so we will come back to the abortion compromise. to execute the rulings for these two cases, which are of key importance, because, for example, they concern the case when there is a conflict between the doctor and the woman. The High Court states that there has been an objective court that will process such case, and also we will be able to use the regional consultants who will be able to elaborate some guidelines, so they can add some detailed provisions. So, for example, the risk to the mental status of the woman, this factor can be used. So if there is a fetus that will not be able to survive, this is a threat to the mental health of the woman. And of course, we will need independent prosecutors who will not watch the doctors all the time, and the doctors will operate in a different way. The abortion compromise was binding until autumn 2020. That compromise was rather strange, didn't function very well. In the year 2015, there was the Kazan case. I was dealing with this case for over a year. It was the case dating back to 2014. So long before the Constitutional High Court, before the Law and Justice Party became the ruling party. I would like to ask you about the situation in Hungary. So there was a woman who wanted to have an abortion. She went for an examination, and first she has to listen to the heartbeat of her fetus, and then she can make the decision. So does this rule work?
So, what we have been witnessing in Hungary over the past 13 years is this gradual erosion of access. And before this legislation came in that you addressed, and I will talk about it later, it's very important to remind everybody that in 2011, the Hungarian constitution was redrafted unilaterally, without consulting anybody. The Hungarian government put to the table a new constitution, and then it was. And in this constitution, there is a provision that human life has to be protected from conception. So right now, we do not have any law that explicitly restricts abortion, but there is a constitutional basis for that. So it is there for them to use. And we see that the narrative, what the government is pushing, is certainly pushing women away from access to the direction of a more restrictive regulation. And as a part of that, indeed, there was a provision that was introduced last year which obliges every woman to listen to the fetal heartbeat before they can ask for an abortion. I think this is inhumane. I think this is an unnecessary restriction without no medical basis whatsoever. And I can say that very fairly because I was a gynecologist practitioner. Every doctor knows that there is absolutely no medical purpose of having to put the woman through this exercise. And as a result, access is getting more and more limited, and more Hungarian women are leaving to have abortions abroad because coupled to this, there is an unnecessary long waiting period, and this entire process is getting more and more stigmatized for any woman who would decide to use this form of healthcare. Also, the prices of abortions have been rising in Hungary. A couple of years ago, or like 10 years ago, a very significant proportion of women who use this service were exempt partially or wholly of covering the cost themselves. And right now, they have to pay around 150 euros, which for instance, a woman in a difficult situation is a lot of money. So the entire situation is getting more and more restrictive. And an interesting point, however, is that the number of abortions have been rising since this new heartbeat law was introduced. And the question is why, and I can very fairly say why, because the government has been doing a bad job in terms of economy. We have a 17% inflation. Job stability is very difficult. So women just decide for themselves to use this service. It's very clear, I think, that it's their choice to make. It is not up for the government, and no matter how they are trying to push us women into this box, what they perceive to be right, women will make their own choices. But I am very unsure how long they will be able to do that, because the extreme right-wing direction of the Hungarian government, the anti-women patriarchal rhetoric that is surrounding us, and in this very cemented system where we are living now, I feel it's a lot of cause for us to be worried. Now, Hungary right now has a population that broadly supports access to abortion. We do not have a populational sentiment that we should change this law. There were attempts or talks or discussions in the government previously of maybe putting forward a referendum on abortion or banning it, but societal push was very strong. So I think it's...
No właśnie o referendum chciałam Ciebie zapytać. Czy... O.
I would like to ask you about the referendum. I wanted to ask you about the referendum, whether Viktor Orban is planning to have such a referendum, that this will be the best tool to ask all Hungarian women and men the question. Can you imagine this question in Poland and in Hungary? Are you for murdering children? Because this is a typical question for authoritarian country. Together with Sylwia, as Poles, as Polish citizens, we were learning about referendums. During our election, actually next month, there will be a referendum which will be composed of several questions, and the way they will be formed, they will make respondents to answer in the specific way. There will be one possible answer to this.
The Hungarian government is quite familiar with indeed putting up questions for referendum, but they usually do it when they feel that they can phrase this question in a way that society supports them. So they don't want to lose it. And I think that right now the vast majority of the Hungarian population, no matter where they are voting for, or no matter their party orientation, supports the right to access abortion. And if it stays the same and the societal awareness and the civil society can push back, I think we have a lower chance of such a referendum happening. Because the things about referendums is they are kind of permanent. They cement the situation. So if there is a strong support, for instance, for the right to choose among women, as there might be in the Polish society, it can be a good tool to cement a good situation. Of course, it can also work the other way, but I feel that the Orban government wouldn't want to put out a question that they would certainly lose. So this is why I think in every country, no matter the context, it's very important to be very vocal about our dedication to safeguard the life of women, and it can hopefully lead to government decisions that are not necessarily in line with the popular choice, but would limit their political risk.
Alva, jak brzmiało pytanie?
Eva, what was the referendum question in Ireland?
It was to repeal the provision in the referendum that in the constitution that I already told you about, which placed the right to the life of a fetus on equal footing of the mother. So that was repealed and replaced with a provision that allowed for the introduction of a law allowing for termination of pregnancies. But as I said, the debate was very carefully prepared. Initially, and I must say that I was wrong about it, because when I was an activist pushing for repeal, I wanted to go straight to it. And in fact, the government decided that they would put in this process in place where we would have a citizens' assembly, and it was done very well, all in public. Everything was online. People watched the debate. both sides of the debate came, presented, and very difficult questions were discussed. And I think it's a little bit different to, for example, the situation in Hungary, because people never talked about it. People didn't talk about getting the boat. You didn't know. People within their own family lied to other people because they were ashamed. There was a taboo around abortion. And this dialogue that we had as a nation changed people's minds. We also had very successful storytelling campaigns. We had a very famous Facebook group called In Her Shoes, and women would only take pictures of their feet because they did not feel comfortable sharing their face at this time in Ireland. And they shared often harrowing, terrible stories about how in the worst moment of their life, they were forced by the government, who knew that women were still traveling for abortions. It wasn't that they weren't happening, they just weren't happening in Ireland. So when we looked at this, false choice as a nation, people decided, no, we're going to provide this for our women and also for our men, because a lot of men came forward to say, this is what happened to my wife. We had a baby with a fetal abnormality, and we were forced in the worst moment of our life to travel. So it wasn't easy, but I think the first thing, and it's become very clear now that you've been talking, is rule of law and democratic debate is number one for safeguarding human rights. And if you don't have those two basic things, that you can't even have a conversation, and you also don't have rule of law where, constitutional courts who shouldn't be making decisions on behalf of women are making them, then you have an even bigger problem. And it's not just women's rights that are at risk. Everything is at risk. So if you don't have these two things, and I'm so thankful to live in an Ireland now where we have the ability to engage like that. So I think you'll have to go a different route. I think people need to speak out. People need to share their stories. People need to be upfront. The media, and another thing was that we were meant to have equal debate in Ireland on referendum questions. So it skewed a little bit the debate, because a lot of people, I would say, before the referendum thought it was going to be very close. But actually it showed everyone was ready. But in the media, both sides of the debate got equal time. So the media is very important. If the media is controlled by a government who does not support women's rights, then how are you going to safeguard access to abortion? It's very difficult. So, but still, a hopeful message, and I'm so sad to see what's happening in Poland, because one of the things that really inspired our movement in Ireland in 2015, 2016, I remember standing with Polish women. We even chose black because of the black protests in Ireland. We chose the same colours. We had a strike, and it led to the change. And it's so sad to see that a movement that inspired the repeal in Ireland has now been, not as successful, but I still think there is a way to turn it around. If you have all the women out on the street again, and keep talking, don't let anybody keep you quiet, because even if it goes backwards, there's a way that it can go forwards again. If everybody is honest and talks about it openly in society, and we know it's not a nice thing to talk about. That was the thing. Even when we talked about it in Ireland, everybody said, oh, this is not a nice thing to talk about. But when push came to shove, people went out and voted because they knew it was the right thing.
Proszę zauważyć, jakich słów używa Alva.
Please note the words democracy, the rule of law, open debate. Sylwia, you are smiling and hearing these words, because democracy, the rule of law are necessary for debate, having debates. They are necessary to find a compromise. I don't know if a compromise is the best word, but we want to achieve something which seems to be impossible. And I would like to ask ask you about the referendum. So let's say if on the 15th of October there is a new government, so the abortion law will be changed, because one of the postulates of the civic coalition is about the abortion until the 12 months of pregnancy. There are groups such as confederations, confederations which states that abortion should be banned. These are human rights for confederation party. But if politicians invent this idea of the referendum, we will need debate. And now I think debate is impossible, and storytelling also is not possible. I am in a difficult situation because at 6 p.m. I'm taking part in the panel on the abortion referendum. It will be in the smaller room, however. So I will do my best to address the referendum. I think that the referendum on abortion now and with the democratic government should not be held. I have at least 4 reasons for this. Firstly, in my opinion, these are the individual rights of the individual, and in the liberal democracy they should not depend on the will of the majority. These rights simply exist. That is why we should not vote on these rights. This is an element which is quite cruel towards women. Of course, some people can say, but we always vote for human rights. It's always done at the parliament, so why can't we do this in the direct democratic process? Well, I disagree with it totally. These are the rights of the human being to one social groups, whether Law and Justice Party like it or not. This is the decision of the woman. So, having referenda in the situation when men will be deciding on the individual rights of women, and for example 16 or 17-year-old girls will not be able to take part in the referendum, it will mean that their exclusion from this debate. I also think that this is a politically naive approach. It's like a golden solution. Politicians are in the cul-de-sac, and since they don't know what to do, they say, okay, let's have a referendum, let us allow majority to decide. The history has shown we had 4 referenda after 1989. The first referendum was on privatization, 32% of the attendance. Then there was the constitutional referendum. The frequency was below 50%, and even in this constitutional referendum, the frequency was very, very bad. So this accession referendum on Poland's accession to the EU, I am quoting President Aleksander Kwaśniewski, without the church we wouldn't have won this referendum. Without John Paul II we wouldn't have won. So then this is a weakness, another weakness. Based on the act, authorities have 60 days to introduce specific regulations, but there are no sanctions. Even if coalition wins, and it will definitely win, and if we have President Duda, even if we have the referendum and we have 50% of the respondents and they say no, it will have to be implemented, because we can see how they implement other requirements. And the validity of the referendum is decided by an entity which is not the right one.
The court should not decide about women's right in Poland. The debate is another method. I do agree that in the light of such strong polarization of the Polish television, it's not possible. And at such a strong player as the Catholic Church, as well as huge resources spent by pro-governmental organizations, we can only imagine all these billboards which could appear in this debate. And the last argument, which is of social nature, women going to the streets, women's strike had its purpose. It was the manifestation of our rights rather than only saying we want to come back to the abortion compromise. It was a powerful manifestation saying no, enough. We are fed up with you telling us what to do. If such a referendum was announced, the death of Izabela from Szczecin wouldn't have made sense. I'm absolutely convinced that we owe to Izabela and other women experiencing a disaster guaranteeing real rights and not saying, all right, we organized a strike and now we should announce a referendum. Really? 6 years later, is it what we can do? Only a referendum with the majority of votes? Sorry, I say no to it. Sylwia Gregorczyk-Abram, Wolne Sądy. She's the one who changes Poland. Katalin, you mentioned physicians, doctors in Hungary. I would like to ask Alva, Katalin and Sylwia about it as well. Polish physicians can use the clause of their conscience. I don't know if you're aware of that. It had been introduced before Law and Justice. Now, when I talk to gynecologists who do not use this clause, they always say you should consider abortion after 12 weeks. That's not easy for them. For physicians who should do it. Question to you, Katalin, what does it look like in Hungary when women were forced to listen to their fetus heartbeat? Did physicians protest? Do you know how your environment, as you are a physician yourself, a gynecologist, how did the environment refer to it? Were there any people against it?
So we also have a provision about the right to object as a physician. However, in my understanding, it has not been used so widely that it would significantly limit access. So there might be some people who object, but not many. It is because I feel that Hungarians still understand that it is a basic human right, and we and Hungarian physicians, I believe, are ready to provide this service. I heard a lot of objections from professional circles when this further restriction measure was introduced. However, it was not necessarily said in public, but more in private. And this is due to the culture of fear the Orbán government has been creating against anybody who publicly objects against their policies. And this is getting just worse and worse by every year they spend in government. And this fear, I have to say, is not totally baseless. We saw people getting fired, losing their jobs, losing their contracts, losing their businesses, just because they dare to open their mouths and speak up for basic human rights. And this is the situation where 13 years of Orbán government had led Hungary. And I'm really hoping that Poland would not walk down the same route. Because when you stifle the objection of the professionals, when you stifle public debate, public discourse, it is exactly achieving the effect that so many of us are fearing, also in regards to the abortion debate, that this openness that currently surrounds it in the society, it's getting less and less prevalent. And this can be a fertile ground for further extremist patriarchal parties to spread their hateful messages. So this is why I fully agree with what Alva said. We have to empower people to speak out. You have to share your stories. You have to share your professional opinion also. And it's very easy, of course, to feel volatile and vulnerable when you're alone. But I always told it to all the people who came to me with this, that they cannot fire everybody. They cannot fire all the physicians. They cannot fire all the journalists. They cannot fire every single woman who speaks out. This is why we have to be strong as a society and also make it very clear for all of our friends who might not care about, politics that much, that politics is not only something that is, sublime and up in the air and it's about, old men arguing, but this is about our lives, our basic freedoms, and we can lose these freedoms for good if we do not stand up in the right moment. So I think it's very important, particularly ahead of an election, to mobilize people, to share stories, and to listen to each other and our wishes and to change the country when it is still possible. Because trust me, with every election that is lost, it's getting more and more difficult and dangerous. And we can get to a point where a medical professional cannot share their fully medical opinion just because of fear of repercussion. And I experienced that. When I got elected, the first thing the government tried to tarnish my reputation or run a hate campaign against me, there were many more later on, but was that basically that I am pro-abortion. And there was this months-long campaign where there were posters of me with bloody hands and saying that I'm a baby killer and that I want to torture babies. And it was really shocking for me as a new politician, somebody new in service. But the most shocking part was how vulnerable it might make feel all the other colleagues who are just consciously doing their jobs and helping women who are in the need of such an essential service, that it can be suddenly something that you have to be ashamed of. So that's why we really need to stand up and speak up and support everybody to do the same. And this is the moment in Poland. So I'm really hoping for you guys.
Alva, ostatnie pytanie.
Alva, last question about physicians, doctors. Before the referendum, had the discussions been going on in the medical milieus where they're talking about conscious objections, were there such clauses valid, or did you manage to discuss these issues in an elegant manner, or was it a war?
I think so. The title of the campaign was Together for Yes. And you saw all of these groups popping up. You had Police for Yes, Physicians for Yes, Midwives for Yes. It was all across the country. So it wasn't one group. Physicians obviously are, I think, really important in the debate. We also had the heads of one of the maternal hospitals really saying we need to bring this in. He had a very level head, but he was attacked for that. And a lot of the maternal hospitals in Ireland are run by the Catholic Church or have an influence from the Catholic Church. So this was something that was, I think, quite controversial, but in the end, because we had the Citizens' Assembly, it allowed for a completely public debate and fact-checking as well. So you would see sometimes people making ridiculous claims and then, physicians would come out and fact-check them. And this led to a lot of myth-busting, proper myth-busting. It's really hard to do, especially on something around something as sensitive as when life begins and ends. A lot of the debate focused on how long the period should be. So while we repealed the legislation and the debate around that was also very important. So it was available up to 12 weeks. We still had a 3-day period where you would have to wait. So there were still people getting the vote even after the referendum, even after the legislation was brought in, because some aspects of the legislation precluded some people from getting an abortion within the time limit. And we also allowed for conscientious objection. I think now a lot more hospitals are providing it, but it still meant that even 2, 3, 4 years afterwards, people were still getting the vote. And I also want to mention one thing, which is there is not abortion available on the entire island of Ireland. So after I worked on the repeal campaign, I worked with the diaspora, we also then focused our attention on Northern Ireland. And legislation was brought in, including by the UK government, to try and force Northern Ireland to bring it in, but now it is still not available because the person who runs the healthcare system in Northern Ireland refuses on the basis of their conscience. So it is a problem. It's still a problem in Ireland. We also make it available for people in Northern Ireland to come to Ireland, to the Republic to have an abortion, but it is not available. And I feel like the way that Northern Ireland has been treated, including after Brexit, is they're just left in a limbo between the two environments, and they don't even have their basic human rights. So we are now in this position that the Republic has it, mainland United Kingdom does, and Northern Ireland is stuck. So we still face, even now, after the referendum, which was a total success, but you can never take your eye off the ball, you know? That's the thing is that you have to keep fighting. And if you rest on your laurels, sometimes I think things can be taken away from you without even knowing about it. So yeah, I would just encourage anybody who's listening to this, you know, if you fear that in 2 or 3 years that you're not going to, your wife, your sister, is not going to be able to get an abortion in Poland, speak now. Make sure that you're forming groups. Make sure that you're telling stories. Because you don't want to sleepwalk into a situation where everybody has to go outside Poland to get what is vital health care.
Alva Finn,
Alva Finn, European Liberal Forum, Executive Director of the institution, Katalin, Czech, member of the Commission for Foreign Affairs and Human Rights and Budget Commission, Sylwia Gregorczyk-Abram, Free Courts lawyer. We've got 6 minutes and 15 seconds for questions from the audience, so should you have any, please raise your hand.
mikrofon za chwilkę.
Katarzyna Wężyk. Okay, so
Katarzyna Wężyk.
answer to this question, suppose the title of a panel would be to change the government and then to make the politicians of a new government to keep their promises. So my question will be to Alva. From your Irish experience, what are the most effective tools to make politicians keep their promises? Is it polls? Is it, I don't know, demonstrations, so on, so on? Also, I have a question to Katalin. I'm not very good at European law, but you mentioned that putting women's rights, reproductive rights into the human rights catalogue would require to change the treaties. And, you know, changing constitution is very difficult and long term and so on. And I think changing the treaties is similar and even more. So how far are you? How long would that take? And, you know, aren't you afraid that countries like Poland, like Hungary, like Italy, which became not so very abortion-friendly recently, could block the whole process?
Yeah, it took a really long time to get the government to agree that they wanted to talk about having a referendum because it was scary to them. I would talk to government representatives and they'd just say, oh, you know, we have this to do, or we have this to do, and it's going to cause a big mess and a big fight, and people won't even be speaking to their families and all of this kind of stuff. That was what we were told. But I just didn't listen to that. We just kept pushing. I have to say, we were out on the streets often, protesting. I used to also work at the National Human Rights Institution, and they were pushing as well through cases. So we were using every tool in the toolbox in order to exert pressure. And it was really when we started striking that the government, I think, said, okay, we can't hold back anymore. There is really a lot of support for this, and that's when they announced that they were going to have the Citizens' Assembly. And then there was no stopping it. But that took years to get to that point. So yeah, I think you have to go out, especially on something that is as tricky as abortion, that can seem scary if you're a politician. You have to use every tool in the toolbox. activism, online activism, out in the streets, human rights at national, international, European level. We used all of it to get to where we are now in Ireland. And I have to say that some parties still didn't campaign in favour, but they allowed some of their members to campaign on the basis of however they wanted. It didn't have every single party's support, but it had enough political sway, and also civil society. And I would also mention that we had a very, and I'll mention her name, Savita Halpenavar. She died in a hospital, and Irish women had enough. And still, to this day, I mean, everybody knows who Savita is. We used that moment, and we never, ever forgot about her. So I just wanted to mention her name here today, because if that tragedy hadn't happened, maybe we would still be years away from having a debate in Ireland about it.
We've got a few women who died in hospital recently.
Regarding the question that you asked me, yes, opening the treaties is difficult. This is why it hasn't been done for quite some time. But we really need to do that for so many reasons. The EU is just not fit for this age. Just also think about, for instance, unanimity. The entire Ukraine aid package is being blocked by Viktor Orban's vetoes. We have to open the treaties, and if we do that, we really need to include fundamental human rights in this reform. And in my personal opinion, it can be done together with the enlargement process. So there will be one point when we want to get larger, we also need to get more dynamic. If the system is not functioning right now, we have to make it work for all these countries in our neighborhood who share our values and want to be in our family, and we want to be in the same family with them, but to join in this process. But you are right, it's slow. Of course, you can use strategic litigation that Polish lawyers are doing very well. There are infringement processes for some reasons or the others. But really, the best way, and you are really in time for that, is to elect a government that really represents Polish women. And I don't want to, take sides here, but this is the moment where you can change things. And you have to make sure that whatever promises made, then it will be kept. And I think for Ireland, after the referendum, it will be very, very difficult for any future government to walk back. So it's your call. I don't know. I really don't know. But elect a government, make it very clear why you elect them, and make them keep their word. Because Polish women deserve the same respect of their basic fundamental human rights, just like everybody else does in Europe and in the world.
And the last 22 seconds for Sylwia Gregorczyk-Abram. Could you please refer to what your colleagues mentioned, and we'll end our meeting. I do believe that the future and the algorithm for future Poland will be written by women, and it's up to us whether we convince our mothers, our sisters, our partners, whether we'll be able to choose what is good for ourselves. This is our task for the next few weeks. I do believe that girls will change this country. Sylwia Gregorczyk-Abram, Katalin, Czech, Alva, Magdalena Rigamonti, partner of the European debate, European Liberal Forum. Thank you very much. I would like to say goodbye to those of you watching us online through Freedom Games and onet.pl. Thank you very much and goodbye.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it and how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihre Ausreise Jestem z zawodu lekarzem. Zajmowałam się diagnostyką chorób nowotworowych.
W Białorusi zajmowałam się mikrobiologią i molekularną biologią.
Byłem nauczycielem szkoły podstawowej.
Naszym celem jest budowanie umiejętności, które są ważne na polskim rynku pracy.
Szybko nabierają takiej pewności siebie, bardzo szybko się uczą.
Wszystko możliwe, kiedy starasz się.
Każdy wybór ma swoje konsekwencje.
Dziś na kazaniu o takich jak ty mówili, że to morderczynie.
A wiesz, że ta, która ci pomogła, trafi za kraty?
Trzeba mieć sumienie.
Jak mogłaś to zrobić własnej matce?
Aborcja to najgorsza zbrodnia.
Gdybym ja podjęła taką decyzję, nie byłoby cię tutaj.
Organy państwa nie będą przyglądać się temu obojętnie.
Życie i zdrowie kobiety jest najważniejsze.
Stop kryminalizacji aborcji.
Kobieta decyduje.
Dzień dobry. To znaczy, myśmy się dzisiaj widzieli. Wie pan co? Ja zmieniłem zdanie i chciałbym poprawić. Karty. W urnie. Dobrze? To ja sobie poszukam.
Serio? Pan sobie poszuka? Nadchodzące wybory są zbyt ważne, by zostawić je bez kontroli. Dołącz do obywatelskiej kontroli wyborów. Zróbmy wybory bez piecu.